Have you ever heard your own name whispered by something buried deep underground? In tonight's horror story, The Whisper in the Quarry, we descend into an Appalachian nightmare where the stone itself remembers who you are. Stick around. And if you enjoy first-person supernatural horror, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that dig beneath the surface. My name is Ellis Ward, and if you're reading this, I hope it's because someone finally found my field journal and decided to publish it. Maybe it'll get printed in some back-page geologist magazine or laughed off as a prank in a local newspaper. I honestly don't care. Just don't ignore it that I'm not crazy. Not in the way you think. I'm trained in geology. Studied at University of Colorado. Field certified. Rational. Data-driven. I've logged fault lines in Nevada, shale shelves in Utah, and coal beds in Kentucky. But nothing prepared me for the silence in that West Virginia quarry that I arrived in late October, when the leaves were already dying and the mountains wore their rust-colored shrouds. The site was buried in the folds of the Monongahela Forest, about 15 miles from the nearest paved road. The job was simple. A private company, Cantera Mining, had leased an old Appalachian limestone quarry and wanted a preliminary survey to evaluate the feasibility of reopening it. They needed an experienced field geologist to map the terrain, check for sinkhole risk, and evaluate mineral yield. Easy money for 2 months of work. No red tape. No office politics. Just me, my equipment, and the rock. The company set me up in an on-site trailer. Spartan, but functional. Space heater, work table, cot. Satellite internet was patchy. Cell signal? Forget it. But I didn't mind. Solitude was what I needed. I'd just come off a bad breakup. My former partner said I lived under the earth more than on it. She wasn't wrong. Out here, the world made sense. Rocks didn't lie. They didn't yell. They didn't leave you. The quarry was a scar carved into the mountainside hundreds of feet across, descending into terraced levels like the amphitheaters of ancient Rome. Its stone was mostly Ordovician limestone, laced with veins of dolomite and calcite. But deeper down, in the older sections, the formations twisted in a way that didn't fit the standard Appalachian fold patterns. That was the first thing that caught my attention. The second thing was the sound. It started on my third night. I'd spent the day hiking a fault line along the south face of the pit, sketching striations and hammering out samples. As dusk fell, I climbed back up the rusted staircases bolted into the quarry wall and returned to the trailer, sore and satisfied. Around 11 p.m., as I sat labeling core samples, I heard it was faint. So faint, I wasn't sure it wasn't just the wind funneling through the rock. A thin whisper. 3 syllables. It sounded like. Lease. I froze. Looked around. Stepped outside. Nothing. Just mist coiling between the boulders and the hum of distant crickets. I told myself it was just echo, a trick of the mind. Hell, I've been alone too long already. Solitude plays games with your ears. But still, I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I met Roy, an old driller who maintained some of the equipment. Looked like he was carved from sandstone himself. Square jaw, sun-beaten skin, nicotine-stained fingers. Said he'd been working the mountains since the 70s. Stay out of the west wall, he said, eyes narrowing. Why's that? I asked. He shrugged. Too quiet over there. It's a quarry, I chuckled. It's all quiet. Not that kind of quiet. He spit into the gravel. Stone remembers things, you know. I filed it under Appalachian superstition and went on my way, but his words stuck with me, especially when, 3 days later, I returned to that fault line on the west face and heard the whisper again, louder this time.
Always.
I pressed my ear to the stone. Nothing. But when I pulled back, there it was again. Softer. I documented it, half out of habit, half out of self-doubt. Scribbled in the margin, possible pressure vent. Unstable? Wind tunnel effect. But deep down, I knew it wasn't wind. Wind doesn't say your name. From that day, my routine shifted. I became obsessed with the west wall. I began mapping it in detail more than the job required. I set up my gear at the base of the seam and started taking deeper samples. The stone there was different. Older. Darker. The fossil line vanished completely, replaced by a strange, smooth stratum that didn't match anything on the geological record. At night, the voice came more often. Sometimes it whispered my name. Other times it spoke in something else, a language I couldn't place. Harsh consonants, long pauses, not spoken, resonated, like it came from the marrow of the earth. One night, I recorded it, just 20 seconds of audio, holding my phone up to the rock. When I played it back, there was nothing, just static and the crackle of the mic. But I remembered what I heard that IT said. We were beneath you before you were born. I stopped sending in weekly updates. I barely ate. I began having dreams of roots, not plant roots, but stone roots, like veins of some buried creature stretching for miles. In one dream, they wrapped around my legs and whispered into my teeth. The foreman stopped by once, asking why my reports were late. I lied, told him I had the flu. He didn't push. No one wanted to stay on site longer than they had to. By then, I'd moved most of my gear into the fault chamber. I brought in a generator, floodlights, tools. It wasn't about the job anymore. I needed to know, needed to find it. That's when I started digging, not drilling. Digging, by hand. I had no plan, no coordinates, just instinct. The rock seemed soft in certain places, like it wanted to be opened. And beneath that layer, beneath 10 meters of compressed limestone, I found something else. Something not rock, a surface. Smooth, curved, and warm. It was around the 10th day after I started digging that I finally uncovered more of the surface. Not rock, not fossil. It was too smooth, too deliberate. I couldn't explain it in geological terms, at least none I trusted anymore. It wasn't a mineral formation, nor any kind of Precambrian structure. It was more like the casing of something. Imagine stone formed with purpose. No chiseling, no carving, just grown that way. When I pressed my hand to it, the whisper came again, louder this time, inside my head. It didn't echo like before. It resonated through me.
Ellis, listen.
I dropped the flashlight, scrambled backward, my breath caught in my throat, my rational mind clawing for explanations. Hallucination, exhaustion, a stress-induced delusion. But my heart already knew better that I didn't leave the quarry. I should have called someone. But the whisper, it knew me. It didn't beg. It didn't threaten. It just waited, like something patient and ancient and very sure of itself. I stopped using the trailer after that. I brought my sleeping bag into the lowest chamber of the west wall and stayed close to the unearthed surface. The stone wasn't just whispering, it was singing. Faint rhythms pulsed in the rock, just under my hearing threshold. Patterns I couldn't quite interpret, like the beating of a slow, buried heart that I started hearing it in my dreams too. But they weren't dreams, not in the way we think of them. They felt instructional, teaching. I saw vast tunnels winding under the earth, veins of obsidian twisting around impossible chambers. And in those chambers, shapes, not bodies, not forms, just presences, like the suggestion of being without shape. They weren't sleeping. They were waiting, and they were aware of me. Roy came by once more, unannounced. He found me sitting by the edge of the shaft I dug, my hands cracked, my face pale from lack of sunlight. "Jesus, boy," he muttered, "you look like you've been swallowed by the mountain." I didn't answer him, just stared at the fault line like it held the answers to the universe. Maybe it did. Roy walked up beside me, peered down into the dark where my floodlights threw warped shadows. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You hear it too, don't you?" I turned sharply. "You've heard the voice?" I asked. He nodded, slowly. "Back in '84, we drilled too deep on the east side. One of the boys went missing. Found his hard hat by the wall 2 days later. Just sitting there. No blood, no signs. And then the whisper started. Quiet at first. Thought it was my own damn thoughts. But it knew things. Told me stuff I hadn't said in years. What did you do?" I left. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "And I never came back till now. Figured enough time passed. Maybe it had gone quiet again." He looked at me hard. "But it didn't, did it?" I shook my head. Roy tossed the cigarette, stamped it out, and didn't say another word. He just turned and walked away. I never saw him again. The next few days blurred together. I slept little, ate less. My thoughts spiraled inward. The voice began speaking in sentences now, not just words, but not in English, in something I should never have understood, and yet I did. The words etched themselves into my notebooks without me remembering writing them. Symbols, glyphs, things I later tried to Google with no results. It didn't matter. I understood them in my bones. We were deep before the roots, beneath the rivers, beneath the time. We remember the sky falling. We remember the heat. You were shaped from us. Each time I returned to the chamber, more of the surface had revealed itself, yet I hadn't touched it. It was unearthing itself, as if sensing my need or answering my devotion. I no longer doubted that it was alive, not in a biological way, not with cells and organs, but with consciousness. A low, humming presence, vast beyond understanding, buried under the Appalachian crust long before the first cell ever divided. I began to hear names. Not just mine.
Martin, Elena, Caleb, Isaiah.
Dozens, maybe hundreds. Sometimes I heard them in the echoing drip of water, other times in the static of my failing radio. Each name ended in a long pause, as if waiting for a reply. Then, one night, I heard my name last.
Ellis.
I had a dream that night, the clearest yet. I stood at the center of a colossal chamber, its ceiling higher than any cathedral. The walls shimmered with veins of black crystal, and in the middle of the chamber was a hole. Not a void, something worse. It wasn't empty. It was full of presence. I knelt before it. Not because I wanted to, because I had no choice. The voice came, not from the hole, but from within me. "You were the seed." When I woke, my nose was bleeding. The glyphs had covered the walls of the chamber, carved deep into the stone. I had no tools to carve with. A week later, the surface cracked open. Not much. Just a fissure wide enough to see something inside. Not light. Not dark either. A texture. Something. Moving. It didn't move like an animal or a machine. It pulsed, like the breathing of a mountain. I reached in. I shouldn't have. God help me, I know I shouldn't have. But I had to. My fingers brushed it, and my mind, my sense of self shattered, not in pain. Not in madness. In recognition. It showed me the history of the world. Backwards. Volcanoes choking the sky. Oceans receding. Continents splitting. Back further. Endless darkness. Further still. the silence before time, and something there. Something awake in that silence. It made the earth. Not by will, not by design, but by being here first. We weren't created in its image. We were just the surface mold, the crust, the afterthought. The voice whispered.
You are close now.
I didn't leave the chamber after that. I barely noticed the cold, the hunger. The quarry stopped being a workplace. It was a womb, a waiting place, and I knew what it was waiting for. Me. I'm not sure how long I spent down there after the fissure opened. Days blurred together. The sun was no longer relevant. I marked time by the beating of that buried thing's presence, each pulse like a drum in my skull. I stopped logging samples, stopped writing in English entirely. My notes turned to glyphs, spirals, strange diagrams that felt like they held truths too large for language. Sometimes, I'd find new symbols scrawled across the limestone when I woke, ones I hadn't written, but they matched the ones in my dreams. I stopped questioning it. I had become part of the system. My body began to change, not in the grotesque, cinematic way, not like some mutation or infection, but in function. I stopped needing food. Water, yes, but not like before. A few sips every couple of days from the trickle near the wall, and I felt sustained. Like the energy I needed was coming from somewhere else. Sometimes I'd wake with my hands buried in the sediment, fingers curled around cold stone, like I'd been sleep digging deeper. My fingernails split, the skin on my palms calloused into ridges that weren't entirely human anymore, and my hearing sharpened, not just sound, but vibration. I could feel the tension in the quarry walls, like muscle waiting to clench. The whole mountain was holding its breath, waiting for the descent. It wasn't until the 15th night after the fissure that the opening responded. The whisper rose in pitch, crescendoed like some subterranean hymn, and then quiet. Utter, perfect silence. Then a tremor. Not a quake. A shift. Stone grinding against stone. Somewhere below, an ancient door, unseen, unmarked, had moved. The opening in the wall widened. A tunnel, black and sloping downward, breathed out air that smelled of wet ash and something far older. Something like metal that had never been forged. Only grown. It was no longer about curiosity, or even obsession. It was invitation. I descended, floodlight in one hand, the other dragging along the tunnel wall. It felt warm, not heated, alive. The slope took me down 40, maybe 50 meters, into a chamber shaped like a spiral shell. At its center stood an altar, not constructed, but formed like the mountain had raised it up in a slow exhale. Upon the altar sat a single object, a stone, but not any stone. It looked porous, like volcanic pumice, yet it shimmered with impossible iridescence. Patterns moved across its surface like oil on water, shapes that drew the eye and wouldn't let go. When I touched it, I heard everything, all the names, the echoes of those who'd come before. Their voices layered in 1,000 languages, dead tongues, unknown dialects, all repeating the same truth. We were chosen. We answered. We became. Images flooded my mind. The ancient earth before life. Tectonic plates shifting like skin. Something buried far beneath the mantle. Watching. Waiting. It had always been waiting. And now it had reached up through the bones of the world and called to me. I stayed there for what felt like years. Maybe it was hours. The stone whispered of continuity, of how the earth occasionally needed vessels, minds shaped by solitude and sensitivity. It had found them throughout time. Cave dwellers, hermits, miners who heard voices in the rock and never returned. We were all part of the same story. A slow, patient incorporation. Some resisted. Most didn't. The quarry itself had been shaped around one such event long ago. The Appalachian Fold. So many anomalies, so many impossible curves in the geology were not the result of natural forces. They were the scars left behind by awakening, and now it was my turn. When I returned to the surface, I no longer needed the light. My eyes had changed. The dark didn't bother me. The trailer was gone. So was Roy's truck. No signs of company activity. As if time had moved differently for me than for the rest of the world. I tried the sat phone. Static. I tried hiking out. But every trail curved back toward the quarry. GPS glitched. Compass spun. I was not allowed to leave. And truthfully, I didn't want to. One morning, if you can call it that, I found a new fissure at the edge of the quarry's lowest tier. Another tunnel. Smaller, steeper. I didn't hesitate. I crawled. Slid. Descended. It opened into a new chamber. Spherical. Perfectly so. Every inch lined with the same iridescent stone. And at the center, something floated. Not resting. Floating. An orb. Black as void, yet reflecting everything. And inside it, something moved. Not a body. Not an entity. A thought, waiting to be worn. When I stepped into the chamber, I understood. This was the final stage. I was not just a geologist anymore. Not just a man. I was a vessel, not chosen for strength, or brilliance, or worth. Chosen because I listened. And now, I would be filled. I don't remember the exact moment it entered me. There was no pain, no sound, just stillness, like time itself paused to bear witness. And then, the flood, not of liquid, not of light. A flood of thought. The entity, no, the consciousness, didn't force its way in. It blended, like ink dropped into water. I felt it moving through me, mapping the folds of my brain, rewiring the spaces where my identity once held court. I remained Ellis. But also, more. I saw my own memories from the outside, detached, as though they belonged to someone I had read about in a textbook. Childhood, college, my first day on site. All of it faded like worn pages. I in their place. New memories bloomed. Not mine. Not human. I remembered what it was like before gravity had meaning. I remembered drifting in the pressureless black beneath the Earth's surface. When continents were still molten skin. I remembered forming not from carbon or cells, but from intention. We were never beings. We were presence, rooted deeper than time, observing, recording, waiting. And now I was the latest page in its long, slow story. The whisper was no longer something I heard. I was the whisper. I don't know how long I sat there, merged with that ancient awareness. Could have been days. Could have been centuries. Down there, time meant nothing. When I came back, when I rose from that chamber, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't a haunting. Not even a possession. It was a succession. The quarry had changed. Its walls no longer held the same density. The stone felt thinner, like skin stretched tight. And beneath that surface, I could feel others awakening. Not just in this quarry, everywhere. The names I'd heard? They were nodes. Each one a vessel in a different place, some active, some dormant. But now, we were connected. A web of quiet minds across the world. The whisper was no longer isolated. It had become a chorus. I tried to leave one last time. A test, maybe. I packed what few belongings I hadn't burned or discarded and hiked east until the trees thinned. A highway appeared. Civilization. I stood at the edge of the tree line, just shy of the asphalt, and the sky changed. Clouds that had drifted lazily moments ago now hung still, as if caught in a freeze frame. The color of the sky deepened, not darker, but heavier, and in that moment, I knew that if I stepped onto that road, something would follow me, not the presence itself. Something worse, awareness. The entity didn't want the world to know it had awakened. Not yet. I was a whisperer, not a herald. So I turned back. Willingly. I live in the quarry now, or maybe under it. Time passes strangely. Sometimes I wake with moss on my arms, like I've been still for weeks. Other times, I'll blink and it's as if only a few seconds passed, though the moon's moved a quarter arc across the sky. People come from time to time. Curious hikers, lost drivers, surveyors. Most of them leave. A few don't. Sometimes they hear the whisper too, and I can tell by the way they pause near the old shaft, eyes wide and unfocused. Sometimes they drop something: keys, phones, water bottles, and never been down to pick it up. Just walk away, heads tilted slightly, like they're listening to music no one else can hear. Those are the ones who come back. A month ago, at least, I think it was a month, a man arrived with a drone. Said he was mapping abandoned mines for a YouTube channel. I smiled. Asked him if he believed in ghosts. He laughed. Said no. I told him not to go too deep. He nodded. Then went exactly where I told him not to. The drone's signal cut out. He never came back up. I watched the footage on his laptop before the battery died. It ended with him staring into the wall of the shaft, whispering a name over and over. Not his name. Mine. I'm not sure what I've become. Not a god. Not a monster. A channel, maybe. A kind of nerve ending. A place where the inside of the earth can think out loud. The others, those across the planet, we don't speak in words, but we know each other. Sometimes I wake from dreams that aren't mine. I see an old woman in Siberia, whispering to a frozen cave. A child in Patagonia, sketching impossible symbols in the dirt. A monk in Tibet, humming a frequency that makes birds fall from the sky. They're not hallucinations. They're connections, and the message is always the same. You are becoming, and the world will follow. You may think this is madness. You may think it's a long delusion spun from loneliness and subterranean fumes. But the quarry is real. It's there, nestled between the old roads and forgotten towns, and it waits for those who listen. Not everyone can hear it, but if you do, if the whisper finds its way into your dreams, don't ignore it. It's not calling you to die, it's calling you to remember. Because long before we walked upright, long before we gave names to stars and fears and gods, it was already here. And now, through me, it speaks. Listen closely. Can you hear it?